interpretación, que vamos a tener gente que van a hablar en inglés. ¿Ya lo tienen? ¿Sí? ¿El material de interpretación? ¿Sí? Perfecto, gracias. Y como si ya estamos un poco atrasados, solo decirles que ustedes tienen un pendrive, los speakers en la mesa, que contienen las publicaciones de la Alianza de los Bancos Subnacionales de Desarrollo, del FIX. Tiene todo sobre la mitigación del riesgo, el alineamiento sobre los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible y el Acuerdo de París, así como, no me acuerdo, el acceso a la finanza clima y el flyer de presentación de la alianza. Y para los participantes, me parece que tienen sí, allí, Gabriel está depositando algunos allí, que son de 64 gigabits, entonces aprovechen. Y gracias a CAF. Se necesitaría un poco de música actualmente, ¿eh? No sé si tienen algo, pero... Ay, no tienen un Mercedes Sosa por acaso, ¿no? Que yo adoro Mercedes Sosa, ya la he cotado en la última mesa, pero no es el mismo ritmo y el mismo intento, ¿ah? Pero tal vez está bien. Bueno, vamos a empezar que la gente va a juntarse después. No, acabó la música ahora. Gracias. Muchas gracias por venir y asistir aquí a esta mesa. Es una mesa que es particular en la programación del FIX, ya lo he dicho ayer en la sesión de alto nivel de la Alianza de los Bancos Subnacionales de Desarrollo, los SDBs, porque es la única básicamente que tiene en foco la financiación del sector urbano, del desarrollo, y con la idea de cómo podemos estructurar la arquitectura financiera que se necesita para este nivel de actuación. El nivel de descentralización en el mundo, en particular aquí en América Latina, está bien desarrollado. Los servicios públicos en el continente van a ser ahora providenciados por los municipios, por las regiones. Es decir, también que la inversión en la infraestructura que se va a necesitar para absorber la población urbana va a ser planeada por los municipios y las regiones. Y se necesita entonces un ecosistema de actores que van a sustentar y en el medio, corto y largo plazo estas necesidades de los municipios, así como las del sector privado que existen y que hacen el desarrollo económico local en estos territorios, así como los developers, desarrolladores y operadores de servicios públicos. Solo decir que la discusión también va a servir para que se integran las recomendaciones de los speakers, de los participantes, en las conclusiones de la cúpula, de la cumbre, en español, cumbre, de la cumbre, y que en ese sentido es importante que, uno, los speakers respeten el tiempo que hemos definido conjuntamente, y dos, que se tenta armar un tipo de visión de lo que es practicable en el momento en el cual nos encontramos y en relación a la emergencia que necesitamos, a la cual necesitamos contestar, que sea clima, que sea desarrollo social, que sea desarrollo sostenible, todo eso. La idea también sobre la cuestión del riesgo, es verdad que lo que se expecta de los bancos públicos es mitigar el riesgo. ¿Por qué? Porque se necesita movilizar la inversión privada dentro del montón de desafíos que tenemos y en particular la infraestructura que necesitamos. Entonces, la cuestión del riesgo y de la capacidad de los bancos públicos a enfrentar esta temática y a organizarse es un elemento importante. Por eso, vamos a empezar con una presentación de una representante aquí del sector privado, para que diseñe un poco el tipo de relación hoy que existe. No tanto los obstáculos como las dificultades de articulación y un poco tal vez también de diálogo, de entenderse, de tener una lengua común y una actuación común coordinada. Eso para que tengamos una idea del nivel de evolución, de co-creación de los mecanismos que necesitamos. Antes de eso, solo decir que la alianza de los bancos, de los SDBs, para ir más rápido, va a publicar a finales de septiembre una publicación sobre el tema del riesgo. La publicación que se llama, déjame ver, que ya no me acuerdo, los mecanismos de mitigación del riesgo para la inversión local, que es una publicación común del BID y del FMDB y de la Alianza, y que da a ver lo que los bancos subnacionales tienen como tipo de intervención posibles, lo que están ya haciendo, en particular en términos de preparación de proyectos, de pooling de assets, y los instrumentos de mitigación de riesgo en términos de crédito, perdón, que estoy practicando siempre todavía mi español, perdón. Y la idea es dar un poco, a través de los casos que se unieron, dar un poco una idea de lo que existe en el mercado. No voy a detallar aquí los casos. Si quieren recibir más noticias, vamos a hacer circular una nota para que recordamos sus emails. Y la idea es que a partir de esta publicación, que viene de un taller que ocupó los miembros los socios de la alianza, es diseñar unas propuestas para un instrumento regional que asiste a los bancos subnacionales por su capilaridad y su capacidad de mitigar el riesgo al nivel local, que se diseñe algo y que ayude a acelerar esta acción. Este es un papel importante de la alianza. La sesión no es organizada solo por la alianza de SDBs de LAC, lo está por FMDB, por supuesto, el BID, ALIDE y la AFD. Y eso y la coalición de ciudades y regiones resilientes. Es el espacio que tenemos en el FIX para discutir de todas estas cuestiones de movilización de la financiación para el desarrollo urbano y de la construcción de la arquitectura, otra vez financiera, para la urbanización. Ahora, acabé de hablar, vamos a empezar. Y voy a dar la palabra, ¿se dice? ¿Dar la palabra? Le voy a dar la palabra a María Clara Aristizabal, que es Head of Real Estate Business en Argos. ¿Puede decirme un poco más sobre el grupo Argos y el paisaje, se dice? No, landscape. Sí, paisaje de la financiación de infraestructura que ha observado siendo la directora del Urban Development Business Sector en Argos. Por favor.
Muchas gracias, Carlos, y a todos por la invitación. Grupo Argos es una holding de infraestructura con cerca de 15 billones de dólares en assets under management, en negocios como materiales de construcción, energía, concesiones de aeropuertos y vías, pero puntualmente vengo hoy a hablar de nuestro negocio de desarrollo urbano que lidero y donde por muchas décadas hemos habilitado cientos de hectáreas en zonas urbanas donde hoy habitan
areas where we have around 1/4 million inhabitants. This is in Barranquilla, a city that is 1 hour from here. And what we do when we allow for horizontal development, we build roads, infrastructure, and we do all that so they can do the construction of houses, and that represent for these inhabitants, they can have the property tax. It's 1/3 of what the municipality is receiving. So you can say it's a virtuous circle that occurs when a company from the private sector like us, through billions of pesos invested in infrastructure, we can help building a connection that is permanent, a fund that it will be permanent, something that we want to do in the municipality of Puerto Colombia, similar to what we did in Barranquilla, a small municipality, where in an innovating project we decided to develop this land, to develop this strategy for high-level people. This is an area that has a very nice view, looking at the ocean, and we did it this way, but we had a great demand. We had a housing deficit in this country of 4 and 5 million homes. So we decided to have a low-income housing in the most privileged area of the city, surrounded by the different high-level developments, and we're going to use this very high standard, and these will bring along huge challenges for us and for the municipality. We're speaking about a city of 35,000 inhabitants. Our project is 16,000. We were going to have 60,000, 65,000. In 1 decade, we will triple the number of inhabitants in that municipality. And for that reason, we have created the property tax. Nevertheless, in a perfect world, you would like to have earmarked those resources in order to respond to the needs that the city will have with respect to water, schools, university, health centers. In other words, all these developments that are necessary in a city. Not having that perfect world, the public agencies play an important role, and DFIs that are present here. Ideally, you can think about something that here in Colombia has progress, and these are municipal bonds or tax increment financing that is working in many areas, and we would like to work together with the public and with all these institutions, international development institutions. I would like to mention because of this example that I'm giving to you. It's one of the ones that we have in urban development business, is the impact that this has on social mobility. And I believe that this is something that is convening all of us here. And it's a paper that was recently published by economists of prestigious university, Rush Shenny from Harvard and Stanford Institute for Poverty and Inequality. We have also economists such as Matthew Jackson from Stanford and Teresa Kupler and Johannes Stobel from U.S. Stern. And what they found out is what is behind the hypothesis of our urban development, and is that the economic connection of low and high levels are the best social mobility sector. In a family, they can move to the third quarter when it has been always in the first level. So this is the hypothesis behind our projects. Nevertheless, they explain, and for that that reason I'm talking about this paper, is that the lack of connection between this social economic level have not taken place in the world for two reasons. One is this exposure, and this is what we want to be able to solve through a design, But the other thing is that they have a friendly bias. And this is that people would try to be together with similar people, and they find out that depending on the settings where these meetings take place, the friendly bias may be reduced or not. And these settings that they are mentioning, we're speaking about schools, university, health centers, recreation centers, religious centers. They are there when they find a market, where we move the private to be able to allocate risk and returns and raise capital, and that they will play an important role. All these institutions that are here to be able to uh, in the scorecards and the formulas of impact, they may tackle the ones that may support the supplementary use to the housing. And what they are saying is that these connections that are the best predictor of social mobility and prosperity in the region and in the countries. I don't know how much time do I have? 3 minutes. I wanted to talk about the relation with what is being expected from DFIs, and also there is a way of, of seeing how, what type of investor can be added in the market, pension funds, and how do you see it from your perspective, how to mobilize them better? You were talking about some papers that are going to be published about risk, and what happens finally. And in the real estate chain, we have risks to start with the construction risk, commercialization risk. Imagine a hotel that you have empty every night, and risks, environmental risk, archaeological risk. When you add all of that, you find hundreds of basic points of a traditional investor that will be assigned into the projects and will make them non-viable. In that set of ideas for our projects, and for 20 minutes where we have designed mechanisms for risk allocation and returns to mitigate basic return. But I insist, one is the residential use, the hotel use that do find the market, and they have like an aqueduct or water supply. This is where we need for these BFIs with the knowledge and practices around the world to allocate or to assign or to play a moderating role. so as to correctly assign risks and returns of more than five stakeholders among investors, operators, developers, land operators. This is what I repeat that we have been doing in the equity territory of our projects. And I confess here there is a frustration that we have in this conversation, is that the product that is being offered, it's a debt, indexed debt in dollars for projects that are based in pesos. So that is an asset liability mismatch nightmare. I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to understand BFI language, because from the private sector, we have the projects, we have those that produce an impact that may be scale up. In the one that I was mentioning in Baru, we have multiplied by a factor of 10x the average salary of the communities around the project that are one of the most vulnerable. I mean, they are in the lowest percentage of income. And this is the impact that these projects have, and they can scale up to these communities. My call will be to talk about risk or de-risking or risk mitigation in order to fill the gaps. Thank you very much. It is a good transition. Francisco Quiñones, Director of Caribel Varogas, he has been listening about what Maria Clara has been saying and how the DFIs and the SDBs or the national banks as well may do in order to expedite this mobilization about private investment. He has been listening to the private sector, and you can tell your experience in Mexico. You can talk about your experience in Mexico. Good afternoon, everyone. This type of conference recalls the importance that economic infrastructure has, environmental and social one, and in general, in the economies to look at the development to maintain growth and a sustained growth of the economy, of the employment and poverty, and the requirements and needs of infrastructure, of all type of infrastructure. It's in this conference has been recalling the challenges that, or reminding us about the challenges that we have in order to solve the issues that we have from the economic and social standpoint in each one of our communities. As you said, Carlos, it is impossible the requirements and the needs we have to look for a way of mobilizing the capital or the equity, and to try to see that in a public-private partnership, we can have the conditions so that between the state and the private capital, we could get the well-being of our societies. And the conference is recalling us or showing us in terms of challenges and of the role that should be played by development banks to bring in this capital, because we have instruments, we have the tools, and it's just the issue of willingness, but it's also a investment initiatives that we need to prepare, or they have to be prepared. And for example, I remember that yesterday and today I have seen that there are some suggestions and recommendations that are well made so development banks could play a more active role to get more funds and to get better rates. A demand that we need to be more creative and innovative, looking for best practices and having a mind, an open mind, so projects like the ones promoted by Argos Group could obtain the adequate financing. We cannot finance in dollars when we are building in Colombia or in Mexico, in another Latin American country, and in the terms and the interest rate that will be the adequate one. So we need to have open mind. We need to be open-minded. Also, we have been asked in this conference, as I said before, that we need to be more creative and more innovative using the best practices. And I gather literally a comment of a participant where he was saying that there was a need of increasing the value and the programmatic approach to support any infrastructure, any type of infrastructure at the government level and at a development bank with the goal of having to be able to offer project structuring through PPAs that will be successful. If you do not have an institutional arrangement in the market to have PPPs, it will be very difficult for you to have the possibility to mobilize private equity. In this sense, it is important to say the following. What we have learned in this conference is leading us to think if we have been doing things right and if we have been replicating this right, or if we are not doing it right, to start working to see how we can satisfy these needs and infrastructure requirement of all types, airports, urban development, transportation, roads, and to generate a situation where the private equity will be certain that it's in a PPP and that it will be able to recover its equity with the yield rate that was stated in the agreement, and that will make possible the arrival of more equity or capital. I personally believe, in my experience, if we do our job, we are not going to be meeting in the next conference because we will be doing our job, but I don't know. I don't think it will be like that. And what I see, if there is on another recommendation for this to happen, because they have been talking about many things in this conference, but I believe that there is something important of what the development bank will do, the support of its participation in any type of infrastructure. It's going to be to have good pre-investment studies. That has not been said. And sometimes in our economies, even in our, there, we do not have technical capacity of consultancy or engineering to carry out good studies in infrastructure. That has been leading us to do the following. 15 years ago, we created the National Infrastructure Fund, and the first thing that was established, I mean, those that participated creating this fund, was a program, a very important program to fund and to finance studies and projects, because it will not, this fund will not be useful. There will be no project portfolio. Many ideas. We're very good to come out with ideas or come up with ideas on how to present an infrastructure. We are requiring projects. We need projects. And besides that, we created the fund, and the fund is financing studies and projects for municipalities, for state, and even for the federation, for the nation. 50%. The other 50%, it's a lost fund, and the money is given by the state, and that has made possible to have a project portfolio. I want for you to look at the web page to see the projects that we have funded in 15 years, most of them with the studies funded with the financing the studies and the projects as well. Thank you very much, and we will go back. If we have time in the debate, we will have more specific details. We're going to go now to the heart of the conference here, and that is to take the banks, depending upon the action levels, multilateral, national, and how they are integrated in each one of these monsters when they are multilateral banks, or small ones that are sometimes the SDBs that they can talk about what they have in Colombia. Margarita Cabrera from MIGA, of a group of the World Bank. How MIRA is helping today. They have always issued guarantees, but the urban infrastructure today, how they are articulating instruments that may favor the mobilization of private investment that deals are closing. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for the invitation. Representative of MIGA. MIGA is the guarantee agency of the World Bank, and we are part of the private sector. We have 35 years of experience.
However, in climate change and investment, we have some challenges that we have to meet. Regarding products and instruments, we are working with two key products: the political risk insurance that could cover different specific items such as expropriation, war, the default in a contract, or the exchange rate of the currency. I want to emphasize that this product of the risk insurance is used the subnational level by municipalities and regional banks. If there is any default in a contract, non-compliance with a contract, where the lenders or the private sector in this area could be affected, our role is to speed up the investment and private equity mobilization. And in many cases, this product, as a single product, does not fulfill all the needs. So we have realized there is another product that we have in our portfolio, which is the one for credit enhancement. The non-honoring financial obligation allow us to go beyond and to work closer with municipalities, with state institutions and regional banks to comply and to set up a better communication and training in both parties regarding use of resources. In the case of a guarantee, in any situation that the prior situation that I mentioned, the main challenge is to understand the types of investment, and as you said, how can we make these investments to be attractive, not only from the private sector, but as well complying with policies. We have some international commitments that set up some high-level challenges that should be as such, and it's important to put this at the level of the different institutions. But we have few projects that are interested for financing by the private sector. We have a balance, to strike a balance between quality of projects, but as well the impact needed at the level of the municipality when there is a fulfillment of a given function. Here is the work that is much harder. An example of this is what is happening with the NDBs. We need to have alignment with the Paris Agreement. We have two large blocks of mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency. We had a learning curve, and we are acquainted with mitigation. We can talk about this. But regarding physical risk, the implementation of some measurements for improvement of physical risk, especially for other infrastructure projects, we have large challenges that in some cases lead to stopping the conversation, the dialogue with the private sector. That as an agency institution, we want to foster this direct investment of these international institutions. I will leave this in here, and then I will emphasize later on the other points that have to do with benefits and opportunities that we have in this area. Thank you. Marco Sequeira, are you online? Marco Sequeira, are you online? I had problems at the beginning, but now it's okay. Marco Sequeira is a specialist in PPAs at the IDB, and we are going to speak about risk mitigation only, but we are going to see diversity of instruments that is being used by IDB to support this financing chain in each segment with project preparation to have these type of plans for the different projects. We can see you now so that we could have a market of projects. Could you talk about this, please? Thank you for this invitation, for this topic that is very important for the infrastructure of the region. I apologize because I have not been able to go there. But I want to make a very brief comment regarding this presentation. to improve the efficiency of infrastructure investment, to have a more effective treatment of associated risk. There is a gap in infrastructure and a demand in infrastructure, taking into account sustainable financing aspects, and this is a challenge for the region, as you have mentioned. Besides these financial mechanisms, I want to call your attention to a very special effort that IDB has been implementing, have been doing for 6-7 years, that has to do with tackling risks in these projects associated to investment, especially private investment in public infrastructure through these PPP projects, which is modernization of institutional capability of the country to prepare projects of PPA, and in the region as a whole. Latin America has an experience of 30 years, diverse, dynamic experience of private participation in infrastructure, and it has gained importance. Part of the diagnosis that we at IDB have developed. We have different levels of this diagnosis. It's called the metric aspect, the measuring of the possibility of the countries to design these projects. The diagnosis is very accurate. Countries need to improve the capability to develop these PPP projects, to improve these developing technique to design projects, because we need to avoid problems with the projects. This is feasible, and we have a methodology that is very accurate, that has been developed for some years. But very few countries in the regions use this methodology with a systematic approach. And we see a generation where we have risk of infrastructure and projects that are implemented with a comprehensive mapping and a real understanding of projects and an effective allocation. And we have problems. There are more expensive projects, and then projects produce less benefits to the users and to the public sector. So the idea is to implement methodologies that allow governments to bring projects to the markets that were well considered by the private sector, with less risk, that lead to conditions of efficiency, financial efficiency, and leads to lower rates, lower fees, and better results for the users. When we see these associated challenges to climate change and those associated to this new demand for investment, which is quite obvious for the region, not only resiliency, but as well mitigation and the effects of climate change, the risk reduction through some adequate practices for this development has a large potential to put this investment at a higher level. This adjustment per se will allow us to multiply the capability of the private sector for this funding of infrastructure. This has something to do with methodology. The question had to do with tools, but the idea is to apply the right methodology. There is a gap of supporting this capability, but there is another component of importance, which is to prepare countries to have institutionality to carry out these PPPs in a more effective way. We have problems with some institutions that are in charge of project preparation facilities, sometimes with the participation of public banking sector. These are not in the area of methodology, but these are institutional design that allow countries to have an institutional organization that will contribute in an effective way to prepare these projects and to reduce associated risks, not only to the private, but as well to the public sector for the implementation of good quality projects. I insist on developing new projects with new methodologies, so with new institutions, because this is something that is the new reigning proof of our reality in Latin America. We have a large demand for infrastructure. We have capital for investment, but to prepare good projects is what is going to put a demand for funding with the offer of the financing in a very effective, sustainable, and responsible way, allowing this goal of investments to be achieved. Thank you, Marcos. Margarita, this is what he mentioned. This preparation is the willingness, the MIGA in terms of solutions to support. How is this working? I am aligned with Marcos on this item. When we said that we got to the topic of having a guarantee to open part of the budget to promote new investment and to work with new investments, when we went back and review this portfolio of projects and apply our policies and standards for performance, which are aligned with the private sector, then we start seeing challenges. This part of preparation of projects is key, and understanding what do we want to achieve with our investment, where is the impact and development of the region for each of these projects, which is a key point. Another aspect that I want to emphasize is when we use these guarantees, the private sector is with us. I don't know if we mentioned this previously, but other benefit that we have is to work and to complement vis-a-vis the type of activities, to catalyze resources to cover all the needs, especially required at the subnational level. This is still a challenge to identify in our institutions what is our role, our mandate, and where should we allocate this specific resource. And this could make a difference. And I see the case of the experience of IDB in the development of project portfolio, then technical cooperation, which is key in the area of IMIGA, is the implementation of performance indicators that are aligned with what the private sector looks for as an investment, and this dialogue with the foundations of the institutions so that long-term we could generate a closer participation with the communities. The example of Argos is one of these. Institutions, development institutions, agency to comply with the objective to help others to develop and then to withdraw, and the market of different institutions of private sectors will continue promoting this type of investments. I think that we have a specific role and the opportunity to identify which is our role in each area is a key factor, and the National Development Bank that has its own agenda that is linked with policies that will reflect compliance when we speak especially about a global agenda of climate change. This is why now on the second table we'll talk about these national banks. Marcos, IDB is supporting several dynamics, several coalitions, such as the Green Coalition that was designed for the Amazon region. And what Margarita just said, the role of national banks is a support type of role, technical assistance, funding. And the idea is to multiply the efficiency of IDB. No, we don't have sound. No, it's okay. I said that I agree. Replying to this question. We have a lot to do. The impact, these topics of technical assistance to develop the capability and these risk mitigation tools, instruments. If we coordinate efforts to face the same challenges, the possibility of success is going to be higher. Replying to your question, to use this instrument to prepare best projects, to have political and financial instruments for risk mitigation that will be together with a good development, a good preparation. We have mitigation of some risks, but other risks remain. To coordinate instruments to tackle projects with a complementary approach. And I think that this is the challenge of the International Development Bank. We have a responsibility to promote coordination, to be able to focus on problems with complementary solutions for the same problem. That is to have a cycle of investment and reduce the risk for investors and for users of the service and for the government and for taxpayers. If we can straighten up and to have a guided type of solution for different steps of the same problem, we will be more successful. Thank you, Marcos. Allow me to add something on this point to reply to one of these topics, because I know that Finditer is going to mention this item. We have large challenges of the exchange rate. How do we make sure that these are pesos and not dollars? And I want to emphasize that we are seeing today regarding the interest of the lender, of the private sector, is that they have a real difference in investment to guarantee from their part, on their side, that they have a gain in this process. And I emphasize this because we have good projects where we have clearly identified the indicators for mitigation and resiliency. Clearly, the negotiation in terms of prices, conditions, and terms and others becomes better, and the rate enhancement is much more flexible. So I emphasize this because we have other reasons why this is not being done. But to have the lender that comes to make the investment is a key. This for the negotiations to show a pipeline, not only that complies with the requirements that we have as a multilateral agency, but as well with the needs of the private sector, because we have high exposure. They tend to be judged by the civil society when they participate in this type of projects. Thank you. On this second table with the national banks, and according to what the multilateral institutions have said, Darren?
Sorry. Es director de Finanza y Operación.
Director of Finance in Indonesia is the first intercontinental dialogue that we have. Then we had Africa and Latin America again. Darwin, in the strategy of PTCME, that we are building the different tools needed to support municipalities and regions in Indonesia. How do you see this, the role that to find the needs of your client, the very specific clients? How do you find these needs?
Invitation, and please allow me to introduce PT Sarana Multi-Infrastructure, or PTSMI. We are the infrastructure financing company owned 100% by the government of Indonesia. We are now on the process of transforming ourselves to become the Indonesian Development Finance Institution. So I think in the context of Indonesia, in addressing the needs of sustainable financing for the local governments, so in PTSMI, we are delivering certain activities which is our main activities on the financing and investment, that being complemented by other activities, which is for the project developments. On the financings and investment activities, our client is basically can be segregated into two areas. First is to the public sector, which is the municipal itself, and the second is for the corporate sector, in which the PPP falls into these categories. And what will be our strategy in helping this local government to overcome the issue on the financing for creating the sustainable infrastructure project in their regions? At least we identify there are 5 components of strategy that we have. First is the adoption or the adaptation of the sustainable principle. We are establishing our environmental social safeguard at the beginning, and then we keep developing those ESS into what we call as the modern SMI ASG principles. So that's actually becoming the hearts of our activities in PTSMI. The second activities that we have, we try to do as much as possible to access to more concessional funding sources that actually comes from the paid-up capital from the government of Indonesia as our shareholders, that we blend with our fundraising activities that coming from the capital market to the issuance of the green bond or other sustainability bond. And then we also access to certain concessional facility from the multilateral development bank and also from other DFI. It really helps us to actually reduce the cost of fund that can allow for the local government to access to this concessionality of funding. The third activity strategy that we adopt is actually on the financing itself. On the financing, as we have 2 pillars of business, which is financing, investment, and also project development. I think we combine those activities into one solutions to our client, whereby if the local government will require any helps in improving their documentation for the projects, so we can provide them with certain technical assistance. We have a certain fundings that we receive from the government, and we are also collecting from our own activities. And also we are partnership with certain agencies, especially from the multilateral DFI as well as from the philanthropies. So by having those, it helps to accelerate the creation of the pipeline. And then when the pipeline is actually considered to be ready, and there are certain risks can be still need to be managed, we are also gathering partnership with Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund. Indonesia established their own guarantee fund. It's learned a lot from the World Bank at the time and also for the MIGA. So in helping the local government to attract more private sector investment, this guarantee fund can help to address certain political risks as well as certain guarantees on the project itself. And the other main strategy that we adopt is actually we try to implement what we call as the blended finance. We established Indonesia first blended finance platform in 2018. We gather sources of support from the multilateral agencies, development banks, philanthropies, and also from the public sector itself. So we put this into certain facility from the project development, de-risking, financing, and up to the last facility is in helping the project to access and the capital market product through the issuance of bonds, or probably for the equity investment through the share issuance. And lastly, what we have that we adopt is we try to provide an examples for our partners or our client on how we implement this sustainability. So that's why in our sustainable operation, as we call it, we introduce the concept of the efficiency of the operation as well as adoption of the green office. That's kind of the things that we are trying to introduce to our client. By helping at the end, the client is much more aware on the sustainability itself, and then we can help for some extent to address their needs on the sustainable infrastructure project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll get back to you in a second. Richard Martínez, que es vicepresidente de Finanzas. Findeter es un caso muy conocido.
Findeter is a very well-known case of success of national banks and support to territorial development. How have you designed this support to municipalities with the integration of project preparation? How have you decided that this was a priority, and how this process is happening right now? Good afternoon. Thank you to the organization for this invitation. I'm trying to gather what has been said about good practices and issues that you may find on the way and try to cover them little by little. FINDETER is the infrastructure bank of regions. We have a national scope, but we go and take care of municipalities and the governors' offices. We have to take out of the comfort zone of being just a financing agency to mobilize capital through different instruments. One of the big problems that Francisco was mentioning is that we didn't have structuring. We have good initiatives, but there was no project structuring. So we decided to set an investment bank and to help the municipalities with structuring that will be organized and that will be consistent with the needs of the territory. But when we did that, we realized that there was no planning, so that we didn't have cities planned adequately for the long term. So we have a problem, and at that time we were observing that, and we are still suffering from it, and that is a problem of political cycles in Colombia. They are quite short. So when I have political cycles, 4-year cycles, the local administration and the state administration are focusing on short-term projects, and they are not worried by planning. So we said, let's do planning area, and let's work with IDB. And with the Sustainable and Competitive Cities Plan, we started following this with 5 plans. We have governance, environment, mobility, and we have economic sustainability, among others. So we have said, let's do long-term planning. We selected the capital cities, and we had a 20-year planning. It is an exercise that we need to keep updating permanently every time that we get a new person in office. The financing, we're a bank, so we realized that we had issues as well in executing projects. So we had an execution area. So in order to be able to comply with the development bank function, we have to get out of the resource mobilization. So we go from planning, structuring, financing, and project execution, and we work with the different administrations. We have now the issue of time. It is very difficult. What do we do today? This year in Colombia, it's an election year for regional authorities, precisely, and this process will end on October 31st. So with the people that will win the elections, we will meet on the second week of November, and from FINDETER in the planning exercise, we're going to show some draft of what could be the horizon or what could be that planning that will be carried out by those territories to improve. And I want to talk about something important here. And based on that, the economic cycle will be developed as follows. They have up to June of next year when, in order to present a development plan. The structuring of a project, once they have the development plan approved, it can take some time, and you have half of the administration period. So we have 2 years in order to get financing and to execute. They have to show results. They want to show they are going to be doing, short projects, projects that cannot be thought about thinking about PPP. We're not talking about cities such as Bogota, Medellin, or Barranquilla. We are talking about cities with less institutional capability. So part of that Findeter case in Colombia, we had to take the initiative and try to cover the different aspects that are an issue for the regional development. Thank you very much, and maybe starting with you and with Darwin, how do you see, considering that the challenges and difficulties as well? It's a day-to-day phase of the bank to think on how is that integrated. That's why it's called development bank. It's not a commercial bank. You have to think if it's in the national context. What will be the instrument or the collaboration or the mechanism or the type of stakeholder that can help this commitment of Findeter? How do you see it from the action, the own action? And I do not know if, Carlos, we follow the same line. What is missing? There is a large amount of resources that we have now and that you would consider we're going to try to lower those resources to look at the social impact, the population impact in a favorable way. And I'm going to talk about the market resource. We have an issue with the standardization of regulations. Something that is green in a country, maybe in another country, it's not green. So to have access to investors is forcing us to have to do a task of, education for the investors so they can understand that why something is green here and in the other one it's not. Why you're using some principles and they are valid, both of them, and they go to a more accelerated transition. So the investors may feel lost when they try to identify what is a project that is comply with what they need. That lack of standardization has affected us. So there is an issue of access to resources as well. And it's when we talk, we have been accredited by international agency, mobilizing a lot of resources. In the different meetings, they have been working about the SDGs, and we have 7 years in order to be able to comply with the goals that we had for 2030. And in these agencies that mobilize resources, you have to present a project if you want to start now. Forget about that something. What would you do now? You will try to comply with SDGs. We believe that we, and especially Findeter, is developing sustainable projects, green projects, but because of the characteristics of the region, we are not focused in give information about the projects that we develop. And that is a fundamental part in order to move forward towards the obtention of resources from an agency or a guarantee through MIGA, for example. And then we have to go on a cultural task to tell the beneficiaries that if you are more prone to develop that type of data, if you are understanding that things are being done the way it's been promised, we will be able to achieve a greater source of resources. So we are very active in the market. But precisely because of these adoption of regulation, we have had to look at some specific bonds and with a special purpose. So we need to do it in a general way. So I think there are many things that still are, we need to standardize, but to standardize in a transition process that is leading us to banks of the region to be able to reach the goals that are being expected. We are in a race against time in order to be able to comply with SDGs, and I do not know if we will be able to achieve it. And now going again to the project development part, that what we have been saying in different scenarios, and the solution is not in nature. It's something that it's environmentally desirable, but to be able to find convergence and consensus that the nature-based solution is sufficiently robust, and I have to supplement it with the hard infrastructure solutions. It's not something easy, and this is something that takes time. In Colombia, we have several examples, and it has taken time to do structuring with this topic of nature-based solution. And today, having populations affected because of climate solutions, we do not have these solution based on nature. So we have seen to also the lack of, the frustration of not being able to move forward. Well, thank you very much. It's very important to underline these things, how we are listening in the Colombian context, okay, looking at the reality where they are.
I think the would be the key main challenge for having the local governments or the subnational access to funding is relying at least on the two areas. The first area is more on how that the development institution like financial institution like us having a clear mandate on how we can integrate it any source of support to allow the local government access to the funding. For example, how we can blend the facility from the government, either in the form of the subsidy or the guarantee or the concessional facility that we can channel to the local government in the blending with other supports that coming from either from the commercial or from the international partnership. And it should be coupled with kind of enabling regulation or policies to allow the local government to have a more smooth access to the financing itself. For example, in Indonesia now the local government in the way they were like to access to the finance, they will require a certain approval from different ministries or different stakeholders. So what we're trying to do is that we need to have a certain protocol to be established. Now we have the risk management protocol, as we call it, to allow the stakeholders to collaborate, works together in helping the local government to access to those funding by helping them as also to improve their rating. That's one of the examples. On the areas of the local government itself, I think the very important part for the local government is that they need to be improved on their capacity in doing the contract management or liability management. Especially on the PPPs, they are relatively newly exposed to the certain condition on the commercial terms, which is they not never been experienced before. So that's why in doing the contract management, it's really important for the local government to have. I believe there should be a certain unit within the local government to be established in managing to those contracts. On the liability, if they can access direct to the direct financing, I think the debt management unit is really eminent, very important to be established within this local government. That's something that we are working on at the moment and hoping that this will be continued in the future. So that's two key areas that really important to be implemented at the very beginning on how this local government can access to the financing.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions, but we'll have time later. I'm not sure we'll have time in this session. We should have half a day at least. Thank you so much, Darwin. Beth Enrico, you are Chief Economist of DBSA. Sorry, I'm speaking English. Es jefe economista de...
It's a chief economist in South Africa. DBSS, it's a hybrid bank. We have geared that to the national part of SDB's action because by mandate, in the first time of the creation of DBS, the territories in a customer that it's a priority customer that was developed and was the base of instruments and innovation that BSA, I think you have a lot to say about what we have said about the work with local governments. And I think in terms of innovation, you have a lot to share. But the idea here is to have innovation they are working on and to share the reality of South Africa vis-a-vis what we have been listening from Latin America. Thank you.
Carlos, and thank you very much for inviting us to come and speak to this session. You are right. We are not a subnational development bank. We are a national development bank. We have an African mandate to facilitate the promotion of infrastructure and capacity building in the African continent. But you are correct. We thought we should perhaps come and contribute here because the bulk of our activities is in the municipality space. In fact, the DBSA has a long-standing history of municipality support. It was founded on the very basis of supporting and developing local economies. We are currently having an exposure of around 31% of our book in the municipality, so it's quite a significant chunk. We have a 44% share of the local market in South Africa. So we've made significant inroads in terms of getting development impact out of that process. In the past 10 years, for example, we have deployed over 70 billion rands, that's about $5 billion. And we facilitated more than 84,000 jobs in the process, creating income, providing access to infrastructure to millions of households. We do this in two ways. There is financial interventions and there's non-financial interventions. We call them non-financial interventions. These include things like assisting municipalities with master plans, project preparation, revenue enhancement programs, asset care programs, and so on. And we do these non-lending interventions through grants, our own grants. The DBSA does not get any fiscal allocation from the government. We raise our own money from the market, but every year we set aside what we call a development expenditure fund that we use to intervene to assist municipalities with non-lending support. So from a strategy and instrument design and intervention point of view, we found that there's a number of challenges with the municipalities, but I want to highlight two, which are key and which then prompted us to develop this intervention platform, which I will share with you. The first one, the first challenge was this declining municipal credit quality. Because of the weakening economic growth trends in municipality level, because of many, economic issues and other crises that we've seen at the global and national level. This then meant that municipalities are more dependent in the national fiscus instead of their own revenues that they would have raised. Which creates a problem. The second challenge is this that has been mentioned here, the capacity and governance challenge at municipal level, which makes it difficult for municipalities to turn around their economies in a meaningful way. And in fact, these capacity and governance constraints are making it difficult for municipalities to respond, say, to disasters that are frequently increasing, floods and things like this. So without responding to these two issues. We found that you can go to town with throwing in money or designing fancy instruments, but if there's no capacity at that level, it doesn't mean anything, you know. So that is where we then came up with an approach to work with municipalities. I'm not sure if you want me to share now or you want me to come back to it later. Thanks.
No, you can share it now.
That's fine.
That's your moment.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So at our strategy session in October 2021, we adopted as one of 5 strategy initiatives what we call an integrated municipality approach. This approach is trying to solve for the infrastructure development at municipal level, but not just infrastructure, a comprehensive economic development at municipal level. Because as I said, throwing in money, we found it's not working. At the time, before 2022, what we used to do was to go in, lend, and just watch our money, if we get our money back, and that was that, and do a little bit of non-lending support. What we then changed was the approach to the comprehensive nature of the intervention. So we now look for willing municipalities, and we call it the coalition of the willing. Coalition of the willing because at that space, there is a lot of political interference. Therefore, you want to work with the municipalities that are interested in the solution. So we sign up an agreement with these districts. A district is a combination of a number of municipalities. Sign up an agreement with them to partner with them instead of working with single municipalities. And we utilize this development expenditure to subsidize some of the lending, but also to help them with the non-lending aspects of the development. We look at what planning requirements, project planning requirements do they need, what project preparation requirements do they need, what financing requirements do they need, what actual infrastructure delivery requirements, and what infrastructure maintenance requirement. So we look at the full infrastructure development value chain, and based on those projects, we then we fund, and we, either at the project level or programs and so on and so forth, grants. So we combine the intervention to the municipalities. We have signed agreements with 8 of these district municipalities. They constitute something like 43 individual municipalities. And we intend to then work with them over a number of years. Every year we want to do this, go back and see which other spaces can we add into the system. What this does, it allows us to partner with other interested parties, whether it's for skills, whether it's for SMME development, whether it's for infrastructure development, but we can bring in other participants and broaden this participation. We deal with infrastructure investment. We deal with managing the infrastructure that they have. We deal with strengthening the governance and institutional architecture at that level. And we support the local economic development at that level. So we think, when we're very excited about this, we think it's a very different approach to just lending and walking away. We think working with them over time is quite useful. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And we are very excited too about this, because we will probably need a feedback from you on the lessons learned while implementing the process. João Paulo Kleinubin, você é diretor-presidente del BRDE regional de Extremo Sul.
You are the president of Verde, and Verde is one of the VRDE. It's one of the champions of climate financing and supporting the municipality of the area that you are covering. You're working with most of the multilaterals and the associates to the ecosystem of support for SDBs, and that is the next step. What is the next step, and how is your role considering what you are saying now and the challenges that we have?
The opportunity, for the invitation to be here. Just let me introduce the Southern Brazil Development Bank a little bit. We are a 62-year institution. We are owned by the 3 southernmost states of Brazil. We manage like $5 billion in assets, and we are growing at a pace like 30% each year. So it's very, very strong continuing growth, basically because we diversified our source of funding in recent years, going not just with the National Development Bank, the BNDES, but also signing agreements with all the MDBs that act in the region, the World Bank, the AIDB, the AFD, the French Development Agency, and the National Development Bank, and so on. And the next steps for us is how we are going to put some private money on infrastructure. And we, in an assessment with the municipalities in our states, as already said by many of the speakers, the municipalities lack the fiscal capacity, lack the technical capacity to put the projects into in a way that it is attractive to the public sector. So our bank is stepping in, providing them with technical assistance, discussing them with the project, offering finance for many of them, and for some municipalities offering scale. We have recently we have a project with municipalities in Rio Grande do Sul, the southernmost state of the country, when we bundled together several municipalities for PPP on street lighting. So each of the municipalities, for each of the municipalities, would be impossible to have a public-private partnership for street lighting. But when we bundle them together, we can offer a more attractive project for the private sector to step in. And so that's our key objective for the future, is to go further in these PPPs projects in our municipalities, because of course there is not so much money for lending, for loans. Municipalities are now with the fiscal capacity almost finished to use loans for everything. And of course we also want to provide them with some institutional capacity component. That is a good example. In a partnership with the World Bank, we are developing a resilience project in southern Brazil. And in Santa Catarina, the state where I live, that I represent in the bank, we cross together, we match the natural vulnerability with the institutional vulnerability. And then we rank the municipalities based on both. So I came from Blumenau. Blumenau is, unfortunately, known for one of the cities we are very susceptible to, very prone to natural disasters, but to have a strong institutional capacity of facing them in our history. But there are some smaller municipalities that are not so prone to natural disaster, but they lack the institutional capacity to overcome the challenges. So the finance is organized in a way that not just the infrastructure projects are financed, but also the institutional bit is also financed. So at the end, they go up in the resiliency scale, not just because they have the infrastructure to face the climate change or the floods and so on, but they also have the institutional capacity to overcome and to aggregate, and so they can go up in the resiliency scale. So that's a very interesting project that we're working on with the World Bank. And also, our next step, perhaps in the future, is how we can measure the impact of our finance. We are working mainly with the private sector now, but we also want to discuss with the municipalities and with our governors how we can measure the impact, so we can offer this impact for our partners, for the MDBs. We are planning to issue thematic bonds next year, not just climate bonds, but also social bonds. I think in Latin America, you cannot work only on climate. We must work on the social bit of it, and we have several projects to finance and to provide, like housing, like sanitation. That's another big issue in our country. So there is only one way there is not enough money in the MDBs or in our National Development Bank to face this. So we use our fiscal capacity and our institutional capacity to help the municipalities and to facilitate them access to new sources of funding based on some climate and social measures and some challenges and improvements that they have to commit to get the money. So that's how we are exercising our mandate in southern Brazil municipalities.
Thank you, gracias. Tenemos 5 minutos.
We have 5 minutes more. If you allow me, we're going to give the floor to Nicole, that it's a manager for the Andean countries. From Nicole, they have helped alliances here and the coalition of cities. So to have this space, how do you see it now, the action, considering the instruments that they have in the zone? What will be the present and the future of AFD, especially to support the national development banks that are the champions in this topic that we are discussing today? Thank you, Carlos. I can talk about our actions here in Latin America. You're asking more specifically about Latin America. We have a de-risking instrument in the African continent, and we are developing in other continents. But let's say that here in Latin America, we try to support the national development banks or regional development banks, funding them directly with credit lines that will allow them to finance with eligibility criteria for climate change criteria. But at another point, we try to develop to municipalities because the French Development Bank specificity is it has the possibility of funding directly municipalities with non-sovereign loans without state guarantee. It is a specificity of AFD, and we have realized that the difficulties that we have in Latin America, especially in the Andean region where I do participate specifically, is we need to develop funding that we cannot achieve everywhere. The smaller ones are there, and that's why we go through development banks. And we also need to be able to have loans in local currency, pesos in Colombia, but in other local currencies. And that is a difficulty for us because we cannot lend. We can lend in local rate, but the rate is not concessional as we will like. But for some time now, for a year, we are developing a guarantee product that will allow us to guarantee the credit lines in order to be able to go to smaller municipalities that we cannot fund yet, whether in Colombia or in Ecuador, that are the main countries that we have in non-sovereign loans. The idea is to be able to have a guarantee on our own direct loans to municipalities, and that is the new guarantee that we are developing, that is fast cities that come from European Union funds that will allow us to share or mitigate the risk of our loans. And that is the idea for the future. We are preparing this guarantee that could be effective in 2024. We are also inspired from the experience that we have developed in Africa, because we have another product developed there for that type of a guarantee for development banks in Africa, and that is effective. The only thing is that we need to initiate and to do some prospect in order to do project. Times is up, and I think that I have to stop. Well, thank you very much, and excuse me, the last one, Maria Clara, I promise for the conclusion. Let's see if we can get it, because I think they will, Rodrigo Masi, that is the head of office of the municipal for international relations of Sao Paulo, that everyone knows Sao Paulo. Rodrigo Masi, what he has been listening from the discussion from the point of view of a municipality. First of all, I would like to thank everyone. I want to thank specifically Carlos and FMDV, CAF, and the other members of the Alliance of Subnational Development Banks of Latin America and the Caribbean for the invitation to participate in this event and this panel on financing and risk reduction for sustainable urban infrastructure projects at the subnational level, a topic that is so important for the city of São Paulo. The importance of having a city in coordination space between the banks at different levels, such as the Financing Common Summit, to discuss the priority of financing development and the urban transition. Why the importance of the current demand of the reform to the world financial architecture that is particularly attuned to the needs of cities, given that today with the phenomenon of decentralization and that we had the widespread throughout the world, and the local and regional governments that are responsible for making investment choices in infrastructure, and as I was saying, for adapting to climate change and for planning the provision of local public services, specifically considering the billions of people who will move to the cities. I mean, they need we need to have a cooperation strengthening the ecosystem of financial architecture, giving the conditions for these to reinforce the innovation capacity that we have at the subnational level. Sao Paulo has been working hard to strengthen the networks it participates in to boost the ecosystem on the city side, making mayors and governors market makers, and understands that the same has to be done on the bank's side, so that both groups of actors cooperate quickly and effectively through their support chains. The Alliance of Subnational Development Banks of Latin America and the Caribbean, created by FMDV with the support of FIX members, is an extremely important element in recognizing this need. It is with this in mind that Sao Paulo will be honored to host the Alliance second annual forum this November during the week of the 28th Mercosidades Summit, the 20th UCC General Assembly, and also the annual meeting of the IDB's regional collaborative platform. We have some IDB representatives here. It's the annual meeting of IDB Regionals Collaborative Platform for Urban Innovation. It's a unique technical and political moment to promote this dialogue and an opportunity to start a dynamic of cooperation between the networks of cities led by Sao Paulo and the Alliance in preparation for COP30 in Belém do Pará in 2025. In addition, starting this dialogue this year ensures that the cohesion between cities and subnational development banks will be even stronger in the run-up to the ICLI World Congress, which will be held next year in Sao Paulo in July 2024. So this is the time. So we are here in Sao Paulo, and we will be in Sao Paulo available to have a dialogue with all of you represented here for the benefit of the sustainability of our cities. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, and once again to all the speakers and the audience for their patience. Thank you for staying here, Maria Clara. Maybe one sentence to conclude. Well, I have to select a sentence. I would say something that Richa Martinez said, to get out of the comfort zone. As in Findeter, they decided that they could not be limited to the role of mobilizing equity, but they have to have a bigger scope, execution, etc. So this is an appeal for all of us on the head table. The same happened to us. To monetize our asset, we need to raise the capital 10 times because the land is a liability and not an asset. So I will conclude with this. That was one of my requests, a greater flexibility in capital structure to get out of that spectrum, just debt or just equity where we are there, and to think about structures the way I was talking about the Baru, I mean, of synthetically generating an asset, stabilized, even though it was a greenfield. And it has to do with what you were saying, Margarita, about the credit enhancement and how our projects in this private sector will go for resilience, and all of those that looking for in your institutions, you will have a greater flexibility to be with our projects that produce a greater impact. Thank you very much. We'll see. Bye.
Let's take this off.